for the NowNet Arts Conference. I don't know if anyone knows about that group. That's all about making music remotely, which is obviously a big topic right now. But this organ has been around for many, many years longer, and they've been doing it for many, many years. But so I guess what I'm saying is I have a bunch of stuff related to that, related to some stuff I did in the spring of 2020, related to using Ninjam and Reaper for music, making music remotely with a fixed delay or a fixed latency, with cannons, and then stuff I did more recently in the summer and fall, related to using Twitch chat commands to control a modular synth and things related to that. And so I'm happy to talk about either of those things as well. But because I know some of your projects are, intersect with some of these things, like you're using Max or you're using PD or some of these other things. So if anyone wants to talk about their project, that would be what I'd be most interested in learning about and talking about. Not to put anybody on the spot, but actually, yes, to put people on the spot.
First, I just want to say I love your work. Blindnesses. I saw the same day I saw a meme that was like percussionists just bow everything in their kitchen, and I was like, you can bow vibraphone. News to me. Two, you can bow everything in your kitchen. So now I got my cello bow out of the case and I'm now just bowing everything. Like we got a new pot the other day and was like, what sounds can I make with this? And was like, I'm so sorry, roommates. Like this is just my thing now. And I hold you responsible for that. So thanks for that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, if you have the link to that, yeah, the Third Coast Percussion made a really, I don't know if that's what you saw, but they made a really great video of that. Yeah, and there are two pieces that I sort of blame for that piece that are also really cool if you like the sound of the bowed vibraphone and just other percussion effects like that. One is called Tension Studies number one, I think, by Samuel Carl Adams, which I can dig up a link to. And then the other one, there's also a really nice video of that. I don't know why, like Vic Firth and like other percussion, they just like throw all this money at percussion quartets to make these really high quality videos. It's really amazing. And then what was the other piece? The other piece is called Morning Dove Sonnet. I'm blanking on. Oh yeah, bowed vibraphone fatigue. Yeah, there's that too. Yeah. Christopher Dean is the composer there. And with that piece really showcases really well, which is also an element of blindnesses, is the pitch bending technique that you can do on the vibraphone, which I really love, where I'm trying to remember exactly how it's produced. I think it's that I'm going to say it. I'm sure I'm going to say it wrong, but it has to do with touching the key with a finger, and then also using a special kind of mallet, a Super Ball mallet, and like dragging it along the what is that thing? The bar. Oh, I didn't know the Coriello piece too. That's good to know. But yeah, if anyone would be tired of that, it would probably be Olivia Kiefer, because yeah, it's one of those things that I think is new to a lot of people who aren't like super in the percussion world. But then I think it's like, maybe it's like one of those things like, I'm trying to think of like maybe key clicks for flute or something like that, where like, the first few times you hear it, you're like, oh yeah. And then you're like, oh no, another key click piece, Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I wonder if I can pull up the score for that if you're interested in that.
I would love to.
Yeah. So the idea of this, or one of the ideas in this piece, is that, well, I wanted to make a percussion piece that was portable, that didn't require a ton of equipment. Was originally written for the LA Percussion Quartet, and let me share my screen here. I think this is the latest version, though I can't promise you that. So it's for percussion and electronics, and the idea was that you could play this on 4 vibraphones. Everyone could have a vibraphone, or you could play it on 2 vibraphones, or you could even play it on 1 vibraphone with the 4 of them kind of clustered around each other. And I think that's actually the version I like best. So I think this is the version I have that's for 2 vibraphones, but really this exact version, the same version, could be done on a single vibraphone. And so in the score, you can see there are certain parts where I ask people to dampen one note while another note is being struck. So you can get very kind of granular with the sustain in terms of which pitches are holding and which aren't. And there are even points, well, I don't think it's in this version because I simplified it a little bit. In the original version, there were points where one player would hit a note and then another player would reach across and dampen a note. And another reason why I love that video that Third Coast Percussion does is because they get some really good angles where you can kind of see the choreography of the piece, which is one of my favorite aspects of it. Let me see if there's anything. Yeah, so I was, depending on your point of view, I was lazy and or practical with the pedal markings. Pedal markings are one of those things that you can get just like really, really intricate and detailed with piano music, but also in vibraphone and other things. But I knew that I wanted to just kind of be held throughout most of it, and then that would allow individual pitches to be dampened. But there are points where I indicate pedal change, and I just do that with this caret symbol here. So it's like it's like seeing the pedal line and then a little caret in the pedal line. I just figured we don't need to see this line extending throughout the whole piece. I'm just going to indicate where the pedal changes are. And same thing with there's occasional spots where it is dry with no pedal. I just indicate the end of the pedal marking there. But yeah, anyone who oh yeah, and this is where we get to the pitch bends. So it works better on some pitches than others, but you can either change the pitch as you strike the note. So that's what you see in measure 50, 51, 52, 53 here. So you're changing the pitch as you strike the note there. So this is almost like a glissando, kind of leading tone into the next note. And then you can also change the pitch as you're dampening the note. So when you see the X note heads with that little swoopy symbol, that's what's happening there. Some of those come out better than others. I think by and large, it's a lot more effective when you do it as you strike the note, because that's where the note is, loudest, obviously. I'm trying to think if there's any other funky techniques in here. There is an electronics component to this piece as well that can be done with 1 to 4 microphones, and it is live electronics, so it is it's actually sampling, adding some reverb and things, but also at certain points it's sampling what the vibraphones are doing and then turning them into little granular synthesis gestures. Someone asked about the square note heads. I'm trying to remember what the square note heads were. Oh, I think that was with the stick of the mallet. So it has a much more like clattery kind of percussive sound. A different kind of timbre in those parts. Just a way to get a different kind of sound out of the vibraphone there. There are also dead strokes in certain parts of this, which you can see here. And this was a way to kind of have, because it has a different, because it has a different timbre also, they kind of add, it's funny, even though it's, you think of dead stroke as kind of like a muted thing, it actually pops out a little bit more from the texture because it's not sustained. So this is a way to kind of make certain rhythmic things pop, almost like accents, but a little more subtle. And then also to kind of bring out notes that were more or less kind of melodic in nature at certain points. And then this is the bowed part as well. Maybe it'd be helpful to listen to some of this now that I'm thinking about it. This is one of my favorite parts, so maybe I'll just play that part. So you can see the sort of effect of multiple things happening here. One of which is, these kind of arpeggiated gestures with the with those dead strokes in there, and then the other two players bowing certain notes, which have this almost like from niente kind of feeling, from nothing, and then the electronics, which are kind of pulling out pitches from what the vibraphones are playing there. Let me see if I can find that video really quick. Yeah, there we go. Let me see if I can find that spot really quick. That's a little bit earlier, I think. It's maybe a good place to start. So the other thing I was interested in doing with the electronics of this piece, so when I'm working with electronics and acoustic instruments together, I'm always trying to think of ways to kind of blur the lines as much as possible between what's acoustic sound and what's electronic sound. And so I'm just looking for different kinds of sounds where there's a connection. And so for me, that pitch bend thing that you can do as an acoustic effect, I was like, that's almost like an electronic effect, or that's very similar to kinds of electronic effects that I'm familiar with and that I like. So there is this kind of woozy pitch bend thing happening in the electronics in certain points, and it's almost like the vibraphone tremolo without the vibraphone. It's like sort of like a weird alien substitute for the tremolo sound, which I don't actually use at all in the piece, of the the vibraphone motor, but with modulating pitch instead of volume. Actually, let me pull up the score. I wish there was, maybe there's a way, maybe if I share my entire screen, there's a way to see the score and the video at the same time. Maybe this is a recipe for failure, but I'm going to try it. That's my philosophy for a lot of things. Let's try that. So there you can kind of see the video. Oh yeah, and this kind of tremolo gesture is kind of scraping um, the bar with metal mallet. I think it's a brass mallet. So that's where you get that kind of like noisy kind of background noise there. Sorry, I hope you could hear that. I saw it a little too late that it was kind of quiet on your end, but I'll also post the link so you can uh, hear it better if you want to come back to it. Yeah, did anyone have any other questions about this piece? Either those of you who had listened to it before or otherwise?
I guess just a vague compositional question. In terms of thinking about, like, how do you say? It looked like, yeah, there's a lot of choreography that went in mentally to preparing this score. Did you like begin by working in short score and then sort of orchestrate it out to the four players based on how they would be standing, or was that, how did you think about that?
I'm trying to remember because when did I write this piece? A while ago. I think this was maybe 2013. So I'm trying to think how it started. I think it started with the chord progression at the beginning was kind of how it started, and I think when it started, it wasn't even kind of mapped out like this. I think I think there were just chords, simultaneous chords that that were found through the piano, and then yeah, I think at that point I did think about the kind of choreography, and I did think about Well, the main thing is that, especially with the bowed stuff, you know, there's a big difference between bowing what's on, especially when you have, so you have kind of two people on each side of the vibraphone. So one at the other side where you would normally play, one at the low end and one at the high end, and then two people who are kind of playing upside down, closer to the black, you know, what would be the black keys on a piano. And so for that, I did think a little bit about the choreography of like, okay, who can reach this note easily, and who can't. And so for the most part, especially with the bowed stuff, you can see, so this is labeled F and B for front and back. So that you can see that the people at the back end of the vibraphone are bowing, you know, are bowing pitches with accidentals, and the people on the front of the accordion are always bowing. I think this is universally true, are always bowing, bowing the white notes. And yeah, let me think about that. So originally, again, in the original version, I had people sort of like, you know, so people reaching over to dampen a note that someone else played. And I think I took that out in this version, this latest version, because I wanted it to be as modular as possible. So if people, because, you know, percussionists sometimes have really elaborate stage setups, and maybe, you know, if they wanted to do it on two vibraphones instead and stay, you know, on their side of the room and don't have to like wander all the way across the stage to get through a million percussion instruments to get there. So I wanted it to be modular, so we play it on one or two or four vibraphones. I don't think anyone's ever done it on four vibraphones. So in that case, I was like, well, I don't want to have to think about reaching over the vibraphone in this case, because then what if I accidentally write a note where I'm asking them to dampen a note that's on the other vibraphone across the room? I don't want to have to think about that. So I took that part out of the choreography. But really, it's only a few sections that have this really intricate choreography, like in the beginning. I'd say the beginning is the kind of the most interconnected almost. And then you can kind of see some other parts where basically parts 1 and 3, who are on the kind of quote unquote normal side of the vibraphone, have material that's very different from what the other two players are doing. And so it really only becomes an issue in a few different spots. I'm trying to see if there's a spot that's an exception to that. I'd say the other part that was really tricky to choreograph is this, are these last couple sections where it's combining the bowing and the other things. But you can see here, I'm mostly sticking to just a few different pitches, and they're always pitches drawn from the other part. So the other idea about this, you know, hopefully it's, you know, distinct from the sort of cliche of bowed vibraphone writing. There is these kinds of dal nientes things, but they're coming from a note that's struck. So it's kind of just giving a different envelope to the sound that you normally wouldn't have available to you on the vibraphone. And that also blends with the electronics, because the electronics is also sustaining some of those notes in a different way. That's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions or anything they wanted to talk about? I'm curious, is anyone using Max or PD in any of their projects?
I'm currently playing with Max, but we're having some technical issues right now.
I'm curious, what kind of technical issues?
I built a phased lock looper in Max, and it works great with MIDI. And I intended to use it for my guitar, but when I use my interface and make guitar sounds go through my interface, Max just crashes.
Oh, what
And
interface is it?
I'm using this little Tascam portable recorder, the DRX40, as an interface right now.
Okay.
And I mean, it works great when I just have like input and output, but if I have any sort of patching actually happening in Max, then it crashes. I actually just messaged Luke about it and was like, maybe we can figure something out because I want to throw my guitar into a PLL, but since Max is not working, I can't yet. But MIDI works great. It's awesome.
What does it work when you use it with a DAW? It only crashes with Max?
Yeah, and Reaper it works great.
Huh. Bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know.
Has anyone else tested it to see if it works? If it's, because I'm wondering, is it a problem? I'm wondering, like, is it a problem with, in other words, is it a problem that would happen on other audio interfaces? Is it something in the patch that makes it crash with audio? Or is it something with the device? It'd be a good thing to find out. I mean, when I troubleshoot these things, I'm always like, okay, what are like all the possible failure points, and try and test as many of them as I can. Because there's so many links with all this stuff. There's so many links in the chain where it could go wrong. Which is why I always tell people to like simplify as much as possible, but I don't always take my own advice there, if I'm being completely honest. But yeah, if you want to send it, if you wanted to send the Max patch to me and were comfortable sending it to me, I would be happy to test it.
That'd be awesome. Let me see if I can figure that out.
Can I suggest a thing? I mean, I don't know, but you could try using pre-recorded audio in a buffer to see if your patch runs with audio without.
It's a good idea.
I did some of that when I was having trouble with my last thing. I'm probably not using very much Max in my.
Yeah, my other thought is maybe it's like a sample rate disagreement issue between your audio interface and Max, because the two most common sample rates being 44.1 K and 48K, but and most audio interfaces can run at both. But if it's like the Tascam is kind of like primarily not an audio interface, right? It's primarily like a recording device, so it might not be as full featured. So if one is at 44.1 and one is 48.48, they might cause a problem. I don't know. I just know because that maybe it's just on my mind because that happened to me recently. Unbeknownst to me, the Zoom audio device runs at 48K by default, and I didn't know that, and that caused some weird problems for me. Oh, sweet. I didn't know you could attach files in Zoom like this. I should try that sometime. Of course, it gives me
a potential security issue.
Yeah, I got that too. Yeah.
I will say I'm new to Max and I'm a hardware person, so I think it's really crude based on other patches I've seen. I'm just making cables go into other stuff, and I'm looking at making it more efficient, but the presentation mode is very fun to play with. I'm very lucky my laptop's a touch screen, so I just get to play with all the knobs and dials on my screen. But it is, as far as the regular mode, it's not very pretty yet. I'm so sorry.
No, I mean, this is actually fairly typical for a Max patch, because the thing is, like, no one, you know, most Max patches are really designed to be used by anybody. Oh, okay. It didn't crash for me. That's good.
I just
Let me
realized
see.
I sent an earlier version that is one of the delays is broken. Let me.
Mm,
I forgot I was trying a matrix out and matrix doesn't work for what I want it to. So let me get rid of that. Receive. Oh yeah, actually the one I just sent is not very good. Doesn't communicate. Receive.
but yeah, I might ask you questions about this patch because it's maybe an email or something because it's not immediately clear to me what everything does.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Did anyone else have any general questions or things they wanted to talk about? Otherwise, I can talk about one of the. I can talk about the. Oh, hi, Julian. Do you have something?
Yes. So I asked Elizabeth Baker a similar question, and she didn't really answer it because she said she didn't like. Well, so I asked the question, what sort of stuff can you do with electronics for narrative-based purposes? I asked her a question like that, and she said, well, I don't really like to think about narrative in music. So then she had to answer a different question. Well, and I'm not like saying this to like spite her or anything. I thought she still gave a great answer, and I learned a lot from it. But our group is doing a sort of story. The story idea is that there is a protagonist who makes a deal with the devil and then makes their way into a kinder, different world. And we're thinking to use electronics more in that other world is the idea, whereas the ordinary world is like very acoustic. And probably when the person inevitably goes back to their original world, there will still be the presence of electronics as a sort of reminder of what they have learned or something. I'm sure it could be very corny, depending on how we do it. It could also be very cool. I hope it is cool instead of corny. Actually, sometimes corny is good too. But what kind of suggestions would you have for this kind of idea and about narrative stuff and electronics in general? I come from a very acoustic world, so
Yeah. I mean it's an interesting question because there's so many different ways you could go with that, and I get what you're saying about like it could be really cheesy, but sometimes I think the opposite can be true as well. Like people are working so hard to not be cheesy that they don't want to be obvious, and it kind of obscures the obscures what you're trying to do. And I don't know. I want to veer on the obvious side. And in fact, I'm constantly telling my students to make things more obvious because they have these, narrative ideas in their head, are kind of programmatic ideas about what different things in the piece represent. And it's there, and it's often there. I'm not saying this is the case for your project because I don't know, but what's often, what's often there, it's often there as kind of like a conceptual thing, like this thing where, like an instrument represents a character, or what's some other good examples?
Specific motives.
Specific. That's really common in opera
and group, and that's basically what we are doing. Is we've all written a set of motives, and we're just kind of playing off of that. So.
And I think that's a good way to do it too. I think more than that, I think the emotive quality of the narrative is what really has to be emphasized, because they can't see into your head, and they can read program notes, but that's not as like visceral as like as actually trying to create the feeling of what's the character is going through and things like that. So sometimes I think those conceits are good starting places, but they need to have more they need to be grounded in this place of feeling, at least for me.
For sure. Julian, just because I'm a part of this group, so what I am doing right now, I don't know if it helps a little bit, but I am doing sort of a section that involves the Kinder world, and I'm kind of trying to start small right now, and I've just kind of tried to figure out the instrumentation. But right now, I'm just kind of doing my acoustic composing right now in MuseScore, and just kind of trying to get all of the get the acoustic parts going, and then I'm going to probably experiment and add electronics once all the acoustic stuff is written out. So sometimes it's just better to start with. I find it might be a little easier for me to start with the acoustic sections and then bring in electronics once that's kind of in there to add more to it.
Yeah. For context, out of the 5 members of our group, I think like 3 or 4 of us are probably like electronics noobs. Like I am.
Yeah,
So
I am as well. So, and I'm still kind of gradually trying to get used to Reaper. I haven't experimented with Max and Super Collider yet, just because I am not a coding genius, and I don't know. It's a world that I'm not really comfortable with, and so.
Yeah, there can be a kind of sharp learning curve,
For
and I
sure.
think some people, I think some people, I think programmers tend to be really stubborn people, and that's really what drives it. Not, it's not so much like that, even that a question of like aptitude is just like bashing your head against the problem until you figure out a solution.
Yeah.
And so I understand that very much. I think for me, and I've tried to sort of overcome this hurdle too, is that like Max is kind of like at the ideal level of like codingness for me, and then like when it starts to get into like coding through text, I don't know. I'm just not as interested in it. And I'm not sure why that is, but like I don't feel the same stubbornness of like, oh, I got to solve this problem. I got to figure out how to make this work. Which I think all composers have about something, right? All composers have that stubbornness. Otherwise, why the heck would you be a composer? But yeah, and also, in speaking about electronics, I wonder, since a variety of you are working on electronics, like what does that mean to you? Like what does it mean to work with electronic sounds, and what kind of sounds come to mind? Because I think more than just acoustic and electronic, I think what would maybe make these things gel or clarify is having an idea of like what's the kind of sound world here, and what's the kind of sound world here beyond just acoustic and electronic. So yeah, what things to come to mind when you're thinking about this narrative of the electronics or the electronic world that's represented?
So one of our members like gave us a little bit of a demo of some sounds, which was very cool. I don't know how to describe them because I don't know the lingo, but it was just like an electronic. I think she basically just put some MIDI notes into a VST and produced this like electronic like motive melody thing, and it sounded good. So I guess stuff like that would happen. Other than that, there was the idea of just like using acoustic sounds, but like electrifying them just so that they are super like
acoustic
whatever.
And electrifying them was something I had in mind. In terms
Yeah,
of
I talked to Luke a bit
world.
about this earlier today.
Yeah.
I think the idea is just to have them as an element, first of all, as an element to sort of push our boundaries into like what we're comfortable working with, but also just like narratively to introduce a sort of element of alienness, but also like perfectness in a way. You know how like the On Martineau or whatever, like Messiaen was like, oh, sine waves, that's the perfect sound,
Kind of like a utopia.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yes.
So kind of like a kind of like sterile kind of precision kind of sound.
I don't know about sterile, but
Uh-huh.
yeah, the imagery we have going is flowers, even though flowers aren't like perfect, but that's like a big. And I also think the contrast between like something as natural as flowers and something as, human or man-made-ish as electronic sound will be fun to work with too.
Yeah, I think that seems to me like a really powerful idea, and that seems almost like more core to the narrative than acoustic versus electronic. This idea of perfection versus, I don't know, what's the other side of that? Imperfectness, chaos, or
Just the ordinary world and all of its whatevers, maybe.
the mundane, the sort of
Yeah.
yeah. That seems to me a much richer idea in some ways, and I think in all its mediocrity, and yeah, I think I still think opposing the acoustic and electronic can be an element of that, but I think it's potentially much richer if you start from that conceptual thing and think about all the ways you can convey that musically, not just acoustic versus electronic. There's all sorts of things that implies about rhythm. There's all sorts of things that implies about like tone quality, and like you said, motives, and like there's so many things that can go along with that. And I think the more rich that is, and the more like clearly delineated that is, the more elements you have set up in contrast like that, I think the more it'll like really come across to the listener. But I'm really curious. I want to hear it now. I love the idea. It's exactly the kind of thing that I would like geek out about. Yeah.
Well, it'll be done in about 2 weeks, which is pretty wild. Hopefully.
Yeah.
I think this week a lot of ZFest members were a little bit well, at least I was a little bit, like made a little
Distracted?
stupider, so I didn't really distracted, yeah. So I couldn't really do that much. But it is okay. I think another thing we're just thinking about is just scale, and I've been reminding us to, don't make it too long, don't worry about it too much, I think.
Yeah.
Is an important
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Don't agonize about it too much, I guess, at this point.
Julian, after this workshop, did you want to see a little bit of what I've been working on? I had some questions about Arhu and stuff too.
Yeah, I'd be down.
Yeah,
I have to eat dinner,
cool.
but I can
Okay.
stick around for a few minutes because
Sure.
I just want to add one thing that that I think maybe you should listen to, that is maybe on the cheesy side, and maybe you know it already, but in thinking about, when you're talking about the acoustic world versus electronic world, the immediate thing that came to mind was the early Borg episodes in Star Trek: The Next Generation,
Yes.
and
Yes,
the
it
music
was.
for those.
Okay.
And in those early, in the I think it's the Best of Both Worlds episodes, those are really good to look at, to listen to, for the contrast between the music that's used for the world of the Enterprise and the world of the humans, and the music that's used. There's a really specific like theme and synth patch that's used for the Borg pretty consistently. And
I
yeah,
watched
go ahead.
so much Star Trek in my childhood, and I didn't get to listen to the music well enough, just because my parents would watch it and it would just be on in passing. So I should listen
Yeah.
more.
But those ones are good. There was sort of a trajectory in the Star Trek Next Generation to have more. It started out as more kind of like cinematic music that like was very like upfront and center, and then as the series goes on, it becomes more and more like wallpaper music. But that era in those episodes is really like, so it is TV music. It's not like concert music, but the contrast and how it moves from one to the other is cool to hear, if a bit cheesy. I don't know. I love that variety of cheese, but that's just me.
Hmm.
Hey,
Well,
I've got a
talk about
question which
cheese and
this
corn.
this discussion kind of brought to mind. When you're working on a composition that has like both the composition but also things you have to build yourself, like electronics and small details like that, how do you divide up your time between working on different scales of the project?
What do you mean by different scales of the project?
Well, like, I don't really know, but how do you organize your thoughts regarding like when are you going to work on the electronics?
Hmm.
When are you going to sketch out the score? Are there motives or details of the score you're going to work on, or are you going to go straight to the overall picture? Like, how do you organize your process?
Yeah, I'll talk about what I do, which I know is very different from what a lot of other composers do. And in the beginning, for me, it's very, very chaotic. And that's for me just out of necessity, because um, if my sort of critical brain kicks in too early, I will just like reject everything as not good enough. So I'm just at the beginning, I'm just trying to kind of spit out stuff um, as much as possible, and a lot of that might not make it into the final piece. Um, and then there's a certain mysterious, and it's strange because often it doesn't feel like I'm making progress at all. But then there's a certain thing that happens once I've accumulated enough material, and uh, and at that point, I start to see connections between things, and I start to see how things fit together, and then it moves very, very fast. And so sometimes it seems like sometimes it can seem like, oh, I wrote this piece really fast, but it's like, no, you didn't really, because you were actually working on it before then, and vice versa is true. There are points where I'm thinking, oh, I didn't really make. Hey, I've been working on this piece for months and I haven't gotten anywhere, and then like in the next week, all of a sudden things will go like snap, snap, snap. Um, but again, that's what happens to me or what works for me. Um, I know that there are other composers who are totally opposite. Like they start with the uh, almost like they start with the painting. They start with the broad strokes of the piece, and then they just start filling in details until the piece is done. I know, like for example, John Corigliano, who someone mentioned. I know he works that way because um, I've seen composition seminars where he brings in what his initial plan of the piece was, and it's like very like, and it's very simple. It's like swoop here and the climax here, and it's very like clear and delineated. And then you look at the final piece that came out, and it's exactly that. It's exactly what he planned from the start. I can't work that way. I'm not John Corigliano. And I know, a lot of composers don't work that way. I think that's very rare, actually. Um, so I don't want to like uh, dictate to anyone how they should work. But the going back and forth between the electronic and acoustic thing is interesting because it's often not linear. It's often not like I do the acoustic stuff and then I add the electronics and then I'm done. Um, it's often very kind of roundabout or circular or non-linear, where I'll kind of move back and forth between the working on the electronics and working on the acoustic parts. I sort of wish it wasn't the case because I do think it slows me down, but I think it does make the piece stronger in the end in terms of the way the electronics and the acoustic stuff are integrated, which is something that's highly important to me. Um, yeah, and it's also another thing that I do that maybe even not everybody with electronics does is that I work with a lot of different kinds of software. Like sometimes I will work in Max, sometimes I will work in Ableton, sometimes I will work in PD. I used to work in Logic a fair amount. And then sometimes I'm moving stuff from one to another. There was one piece that I wrote based on cellular automata that where I created a max patch that would spit out MIDI. You know, I would sort of mess with the parameters and would spit out some MIDI, and then I would bring the MIDI into Sibelius, and then kind of shape and craft the material on that end. And that was very time consuming, a very kind of hacky way of getting stuff from max patch into notation. But again, I think in the end, it's closer to what I want, which is this really tight integration between the acoustic world and the electronic worlds, where you don't necessarily know where one ends and one begins. Again, I'm going long-winded, but I hope that answers your question in some form. Well, it's like 4 where I am, but I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes if people have more questions, or want to share anything, or want me to share something else.
I should probably go and talk to Amanda before I eat dinner. But thanks for the advice. I'll probably ask for more advice in about a week. Although I think a week from now we're supposed to have our audio almost done. Maybe we can have something to show by then.
Yeah, I would love to see some of it by then. That would be wonderful. Yeah, and thank you for the questions.
Oh, one more thing. Have you ever played Celeste? Do you know that game?
Yeah, yeah.
Just wondering. I saw a friend beat it recently and I was just so impressed. It's so hard. It looks so difficult.
It's really hard, but it's also really good at like preparing you for the next thing. Has a really good difficulty curve, and also has a really great soundtrack.
Yeah, I read an
think.
article about today and I was thinking about the music of it too. So I was like, oh yeah, video game music. Oh yeah.
Yeah, the composer of that, Lena Raine, she's done a bunch of really amazing stuff. Yeah. I like your cat.
Okay. Amanda, should we make another Zoom?
Do you want a breakout room?
Oh yeah, yeah. Can you just make a breakout room? That'd be
Breakout
really,
rooms will be
yeah, that'd be so nice. You can visit
Yeah.
us if you want, or maybe don't. It's up to you.
And then I'll get off the live stream. And then I'll try not to shut down the Zoom and forget about you.
Okay, we're going to breakout room. Bye, y'all. See ya.
Bye.